The drop pod shook violently as it pierced through the thick atmosphere of Zur-7, a planet so dangerous that even the most advanced alien species feared to set foot on it. Storm clouds raged in the sky, and lightning cracked across the endless expanse of dark jungles and jagged mountains below. Inside the pod, Captain Elias Carter remained calm, his sharp eyes scanning the data feed on his wrist display. His team of 5 highly trained explorers sat beside him, their expressions a mix of excitement and focus. Unlike the terrified alien observers watching their descent from orbit, the humans weren't afraid. They were ready. The Galactic Council had long considered humanity a lesser species, physically weaker than the towering Grax warriors and far less advanced than the hyper-intelligent Vorith scientists. Humans had been given a challenge, a test to prove their worth. If they could survive on Xur-7, they would earn a place among the Council's elite ranks. But the aliens weren't expecting survival. They were expecting a massacre. No species had ever endured this planet's merciless ecosystem. Every attempt had ended the same way: distress signals cut short, ships left abandoned, and teams never returning. The jungles of Xur-7 were alive in ways no one truly understood. Every tree, every shadow, and every breath of air carried unseen dangers. The moment the pod landed, the door hissed open, releasing pressurized air into the thick, humid environment. The team stepped out cautiously, their boots sinking slightly into the damp, moss-covered ground. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and something else, something primal. Towering trees, their bark blackened like charred bones, stretched high into the sky, their massive roots twisting across the landscape like the limbs of some ancient beast. The sounds of the jungle were unnatural. No birds, no insect hums, just a deep, rhythmic breathing that seemed to echo from the planet itself. As the team spread out, scanning the area, Lieutenant Sarah Vega, the team's biologist, adjusted her visor and muttered, "This place isn't just a jungle. It's a battlefield." She pointed toward deep gashes in the ground, claw marks stretching meters wide, as if something enormous had torn through the terrain. Fresh. The creature that made them wasn't far. The alien observers, who had set up surveillance from their hovering research station high above the planet, sent a warning transmission. "Human team, we detect movement. Large predator. Recommend immediate evacuation." But Captain Carter only smirked. "Noted," he replied, switching off the comm. The aliens didn't understand humans. Running wasn't an option. Understanding the threat was. He signaled his team to stay alert and move forward. The jungle grew denser, the light barely filtering through the thick canopy. The silence was suffocating, but Carter knew something was watching them. Something intelligent. Then, without warning, the trees to their right exploded into motion. A blur of dark muscle and jagged bone plates charged forward, its eyes glowing like molten embers in the dim light. It was a dread maw, the apex predator of Xur-7, a creature so feared that even the most powerful alien warlords spoke of it in hushed whispers. The alien observers gasped as the massive beast lunged, its serrated fangs gleaming in the shadows. The logical response would have been to shoot, to run, but humans weren't always logical. Instead, Carter raised a hand, signaling his team to hold fire. The beast skidded to a halt, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. It expected prey. It found something else. The humans didn't tremble. They didn't scream. They stared, studied. The creature let out a low, guttural growl, its massive claws digging into the soil. But Carter had seen something crucial. The way it moved, the way it hesitated. This wasn't just an animal. It was calculating, deciding whether the humans were worth the effort. Lieutenant Vega whispered, "Sir, what are you thinking?" Carter took a slow step forward. The alien observers watching from orbit panicked, their voices overlapping in frantic transmissions. "They're going to die. The humans are insane." But down on the surface, something remarkable was happening. The dread maw, a creature that had slaughtered countless life forms without hesitation, wasn't attacking. It was watching. Testing. Carter crouched, keeping his eyes locked onto the beast's molten gaze. He didn't reach for his weapon. He didn't act like prey. He acted like something else. The tension in the air was thick, every second stretching into eternity. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the beast let out a deep, guttural huff and took a step back. The ground trembled beneath its weight. It wasn't submission. It was acknowledgement. The alien observers were silent. The impossible had just happened. Humans had done something no other species had managed. They hadn't run. They hadn't fought. They had stood their ground, and in doing so, they had survived the first encounter. As the dread maw disappeared back into the shadows, the jungle seemed to exhale, the weight of an unspoken understanding settling over the land. Carter finally stood, exhaling. "We're in," he said, a smirk playing at the edge of his lips. The mission wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving something. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, but they had no idea what they were truly capable of. And this was only the beginning. The jungle was alive, but not in the way most people imagine. There were no birds chirping, no insects buzzing, no rustling of leaves in the wind. Instead, the air was thick with something unseen, an eerie presence that pressed against the senses like an invisible hand. Every step the human team took was careful, precise. The ground beneath them was damp, covered in a layer of dark, moss-like vegetation that seemed to shift slightly under their boots. The trees towered above, their bark twisted and covered in strange bioluminescent veins that pulsed faintly in the dim light. Somewhere beyond the dense foliage, something massive was moving, but the jungle swallowed the sound before it could fully reach them. Captain Elias Carter raised a fist, signaling his team to stop. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and something far worse, the unmistakable musk of a predator. They weren't alone. The alien observers watching from their research station high above the planet had already detected movement. Their frantic voices crackled over the comms, warning the humans of an incoming threat. "Human team, you are being hunted. Repeat, you are being hunted. Retreat immediately." But Carter didn't react. He remained still, his sharp eyes scanning the thick jungle around them. He knew something the aliens didn't. Running was the worst thing they could do. Prey ran, and whatever was watching them wasn't looking for weak prey. It was testing them. Lieutenant Sarah Vega gripped her rifle a little tighter, her breathing controlled but tense. She had studied the creatures of this world before they arrived. The dread maw was not just an apex predator, it was a nightmare given form. Standing over 4 meters tall, covered in black, jagged armor like scales, it was fast, intelligent, and relentless. Nothing in the known galaxy had ever survived a direct encounter with one, at least not without heavy losses. Even the most battle-hardened alien warriors spoke of the beast with fear. And now, something in the shadows was watching them with the same cold calculation that a hunter gives its prey. Then it happened. A deep, bone-chilling growl rumbled through the trees, not from one direction, but from all around them. It wasn't alone. The jungle seemed to pulse as multiple eyes, glowing like molten embers, flickered in the darkness. The dread maws had them surrounded. The alien observers panicked, their voices turning into chaotic shouts over the comms, urging the humans to flee. But Carter remained unmoved. His mind worked fast, processing everything: the terrain, the distance between each of the creatures, their behavior. And then he did something that made the aliens watching scream in disbelief. He took a step forward. The lead dread maw emerged from the shadows. It was even bigger than they had expected. Its elongated head was covered in overlapping plates of bone, its massive claws flexing as it studied them. The air seemed to vibrate as the beast exhaled, its breath hot and laced with a scent that sent lesser creatures into a state of pure terror. But the humans didn't flinch. Carter's voice was low, calm. "Hold your ground," he ordered. His team obeyed, though he could feel their tension. Their fingers were on their triggers, but not a single shot was fired. Not yet. The alien observers were in shock. No other species had ever dared to face a dread maw without immediately resorting to weapons. But humans were different. They understood something fundamental about predators sometimes. The best way to survive was to show no fear. The beast let out a low, guttural sound, taking another step forward, closing the distance. The other dread maws shifted in the darkness, waiting, watching. It was a standoff, but Carter knew the first move would decide everything. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he crouched slightly, lowering his weapon but not dropping it. It was a risk, but it was necessary. The dread maw's burning eyes locked onto him, its body tense. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The alien observers were holding their breath. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. Then, finally, the beast made its choice. The massive creature let out a deep exhale and took a single step back. It wasn't submission, but it wasn't aggression either. It was recognition. The humans weren't prey. They were something else. Something that didn't break under pressure. Something that understood the rules of survival. And just like that, the impossible happened. The dread maws didn't attack. They didn't retreat either. They simply melted back into the jungle, leaving the humans standing there, alive, unscathed. The comms were silent for a long moment before the alien observers finally spoke, their voices barely above whispers. How did you do that? Carter allowed himself a small, knowing smirk. Simple, he said. We don't run. The jungle was never silent. Even in the dead of night, the air pulsed with life, with unseen creatures slithering through the undergrowth, their glowing eyes flickering between the dense foliage. It had been days since the first encounter, and yet Captain Elias Carter and his team had not left the death world. They could have retreated, called for extraction, and declared their mission a success simply by surviving the dread maw's presence. But survival wasn't the goal, understanding was. The aliens monitoring them from the orbital research station still couldn't believe what had happened. No species had ever stood before the apex predators of this world and lived to tell the tale without running or fighting. But humans were different. They had something most species lacked the ability to observe, to adapt, and most of all, to connect. Carter crouched beside the large footprint embedded in the dark soil. The size, the depth, the spacing, it was the same dread maw that had first tested them. It was still watching, still tracking them. But the behavior had changed. The creature no longer moved with the intent to kill, no longer hunted them in the way it did others. It was studying them just as much as they were studying it. A strange relationship had begun to form, one that Carter knew most wouldn't understand. To the aliens watching from above, it made no sense. How could a species as ruthless as the dread maw's creatures that had wiped out entire colonies of lesser beings hesitate against humans? But to Carter, the answer was simple. It wasn't about dominance. It was about recognition. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the jungle. The team had set up a small perimeter near a riverbank, their movements careful but not fearful. There was no need for barricades, no desperate attempt to keep the jungle at bay. If the dread maw wanted to kill them, it would have done so already. Instead, it watched, always at the edge of the trees, just beyond the reach of their lights, its massive form barely visible in the darkness. It was waiting for something, testing them in a different way now. Carter could feel it, the shift from predator and prey into something else, something far older than war or survival. It was trust, fragile but growing. Then, the moment came. A rustling in the distance, different from the usual sounds of the jungle. Something was wrong. The air was thick with a scent that sent a shiver down Carter's spine. Not fear, anticipation. A new predator was near, one they hadn't encountered before. The jungle held more dangers than just the dread maws, and whatever this was, it didn't hesitate in making its move. A blur of movement. A guttural, screeching roar split the night air, and before the humans could react, something massive lunged from the darkness. It wasn't a dread maw. This was something faster, something deadlier. It crashed through the trees with unnatural speed, its many limbs moving in a blur, its elongated head filled with rows of needle-like teeth. It had been hunting them for days, waiting for the right moment. The humans barely had time to react before it was on them. Gunfire erupted, bright flashes illuminating the dark jungle, but the creature didn't stop. It twisted through the barrage of bullets, its exoskeletal armor deflecting most of the shots. It was something beyond any known classification, something the aliens hadn't warned them about. The team moved fast, instinct taking over, but they were seconds away from being overrun. And then, something else moved in the darkness. A deep, thunderous roar shook the jungle, a sound so primal that even the monstrous predator hesitated. The humans turned just in time to see it, the dread maw. It didn't hesitate. The massive beast surged forward, its armor like scales catching the moonlight, its claws tearing through the undergrowth as it launched itself at the unknown predator. The jungle exploded into chaos. Trees snapped like twigs as the two titans clashed. The attacking creature was fast, impossibly fast, its needle-sharp limbs slashing at the dread maw's thick hide. But the dread maw was stronger. Its jaws clamped down, crushing through exoskeleton with terrifying force. The battle was brutal, a raw display of nature's most unforgiving law. Only the strongest survived. The humans stood frozen, weapons lowered, watching as their once feared hunter fought not against them, but for them. The realization settled in like a weight upon them all. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't mere territorial aggression. The dread maw had made a choice. It had chosen them. Minutes felt like hours as the struggle continued. The jungle was filled with the sounds of tearing flesh, of primal fury unleashed. And then, silence. The dread maw stood victorious, its massive form towering over the broken body of its fallen foe. Blood dripped from its claws, its breath heavy, but its eyes searched for something else. It turned toward the humans, its glowing gaze locking onto Carter, not with hunger, not with hostility, but with acknowledgement. Carter took a slow step forward, unarmed, his hands open at his sides. The team held their breath. The alien observers watching from above were in shock, their voices frantic over the comms. But Carter wasn't listening to them. He was listening to something older, something deeper than language. The dread maw lowered its massive head slightly, just enough for Carter to understand. It wasn't submission. It wasn't dominance. It was acceptance. The jungle stretched endlessly, its towering trees swaying under the weight of an unseen breeze. Somewhere in the distance, the echo of distant roars vibrated through the thick foliage. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, the faint traces of something far more primal lingering beneath. It had been days since the battle, days since the dread maw had chosen them instead of killing them. And yet, the hardest challenge still remained control. The idea was madness to the aliens observing from the station above. No creature from this world had ever been tamed, let alone one as fearsome as the dread maw. Entire species had fled before them, whole civilizations had fallen to their relentless hunger. But now, one of these unstoppable monsters stood with humans, not against them. And Carter knew this was only the beginning. The dread maw moved with silent purpose, its massive body shifting with terrifying grace, muscles rippling beneath thick, plated skin. It wasn't a pet, nor was it a slave to instinct anymore. It was something else, something the universe wasn't ready to understand. The humans had spent the past few days watching, learning, testing the unthinkable. The first step wasn't force, it was trust. And trust was fragile. Every movement mattered. Every action was a message. They did not attempt to leash it, nor did they cage it. That would have meant death. This wasn't about bending the creature to their will. It was about showing that they were equals. That they, too, were apex predators. Carter stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes locked onto the beast. The team remained still, watching, waiting. The dread maw's gaze flickered across them all, its pupils contracting as it studied their every motion. One wrong move, one hint of weakness, and everything they had built would shatter. The air was charged with an unspoken challenge, a battle not of strength, but of will. Carter took a slow step forward, his heart pounding against his ribs. The beast exhaled, a deep rumbling sound vibrating through the earth beneath his boots. It was waiting for something. Slowly, deliberately, Carter raised his hand not as a sign of command, but of understanding. The dread maw's nostrils flared, taking in his scent, its head lowering ever so slightly. It was an acknowledgement, a test, and Carter did not hesitate. He moved forward, step by step, until he could feel the creature's breath against his skin. The others watched in stunned silence. The aliens above had stopped speaking entirely, their instruments frantically recording every second of the impossible moment. Then, the dread maw did something that sent a shiver through every witness. It allowed Carter to touch it. His palm pressed against the rough, armored hide. It was warm beneath his fingers, the slow rise and fall of its breath vibrating through his bones. The world held its breath. And then, the bond was sealed. The beast did not flinch, did not lash out. Instead, it simply watched, waiting. Understanding passed between them in a language older than words. It wasn't submission. It was respect. The aliens above were losing their minds, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. But Carter knew. He had seen this before, not with creatures of the stars, but with wolves, with lions, with predators from Earth. It wasn't the strongest who led, nor the fastest. It was the one who knew when to fight and when to stand still. The next test came swiftly. Another creature lurked beyond the tree line, its form hidden in the thick jungle. Not a rival, not a predator, but prey. A massive, lumbering beast that normally would have sent the dread maw into a frenzy. But it did not move. It waited, its muscles coiled, its instincts raging. This was the true test. Would it break from the fragile understanding they had built? Would it return to the unstoppable killer it had once been? Or had something changed? Carter kept his stance firm, his voice calm as he uttered the single word that mattered most. Wait. The creature's body tensed. Every fiber of its being screamed to chase, to kill. And yet, it did not move. A slow exhale left its massive jaws, and then without a sound, it turned away from the hunt. The aliens above gasped in disbelief. The humans exchanged stunned glances. Carter smiled. The unthinkable had been tamed. They were no longer prey. They were no longer separate forces of nature. They were something else now, something the galaxy would fear and respect. The footage spread faster than wildfire, reaching every corner of the galaxy within hours. The sight of a human standing side by side with a fully grown dread maw, a beast that had devastated entire colonies and wiped out entire species, shattered everything the galaxy thought it understood about Earth's people. The dread maw was a nightmare, a force of nature, a predator that nothing could command. And yet, the humans had done the impossible. They had not just survived its wrath, they had tamed it. Across the galactic network, leaders of empires, warlords, scholars, and common citizens alike stared at their screens in disbelief. The sheer scale of the event was beyond comprehension. In the high chambers of the Exelther Dominion, a race known for its military prowess, the Supreme War Strategist replayed the footage over and over, eyes narrowing each time the human reached out, placed his hand on the monster's armored hide, and lived to tell the tale. The Exelther had warred against creatures like the dread maw for centuries, losing thousands of their own in failed attempts to eliminate them. And yet, humans had gained its trust. In the halls of the Galactic Union, representatives of hundreds of species whispered in shock and uncertainty. The general consensus for centuries had been simple. Humans were dangerous, unpredictable, but ultimately weak. They had no great armadas, no ancient bloodlines of warriors, no overwhelming physical advantages like the others. They were smaller than the Exelther, weaker than the Hulvok, slower than the Avarian Sky Hunters. But now, none of that mattered. Strength was not just about muscle or numbers. Strength was about understanding the wild. On the desolate moons of the Varaxian clans, mercenaries watched the broadcast with newfound caution. They had hunted humans before, believing them to be easy prey. But they had never seen this side of them. Humans were supposed to be civilized, bound by rules, relying on technology like any other race. But now, it was clear humans were something different. They were creatures who walked alongside the monsters that made others flee. In the war chambers of the Dravox Imperium, the ruling council sat in silence. Their empire had long planned to expand into the unclaimed territories near human space, seeing them as a minor nuisance that would be easily conquered. But now? No, this changed everything. If humans could tame Deathworld beasts, what else were they capable of? The galaxy had always categorized species in a simple hierarchy: the weak, the strong, and the untouchable. Humans had always been seen as somewhere in the middle. But with this revelation, they no longer fit into any category. They weren't simply strong. They were something far worse: unpredictable. Meanwhile, aboard the orbital station above the Death World, the alien scientists who had been studying the Dread Maw's behavior were in a state of pure panic. Their instruments had recorded every second of the encounter, and they had no explanation for what had just happened. The logic of biology, the patterns of predatory instinct, the laws of survival humans had broken them all. The lead scientist, a pale-skinned Xerian, paced back and forth, struggling to form a report that would not sound utterly insane to his superiors. This cannot be real," muttered one of the junior researchers, watching as the footage played again. The human Carter stood next to the beast, calm, composed, while the creature that had once terrorized planets remained still at his side. It should have killed him. It should have devoured all of them. The lead scientist turned, eyes wide with something close to fear. And yet, it didn't. The realization spread like a disease, infecting the minds of those who had long believed in the natural order of the universe. The Xerian shook his head. If they can do this, then what else can they do? That was the question now echoing through the minds of every race in the galaxy. If humans could walk alongside the uncontrollable, if they could reach into the mind of something as wild and untamed as a Dread Maw and form a bond, then the balance of power had shifted. The galaxy had always feared warlords, fleets, and weapons of mass destruction. But this was something far more terrifying. A species that could tame the chaos of the universe itself. The first signs of fear came quickly. A ex-Selther military commander, previously eager to provoke war with humanity, quietly rescinded his invasion orders. The Dravox Imperium's fleets that had been positioned near human colonies suddenly withdrew, their leaders unsure if they wanted to test their luck against a species that commanded monsters. Even the ruthless Varaxian hunters, who had once seen humans as nothing more than sport, began rethinking their choices. For the first time, the galaxy hesitated. Back on the Death World, Carter stood with his team, the weight of what they had just accomplished settling over them. They had started this mission believing they were simply explorers, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. But now, they had become something far greater. They had reshaped the galaxy's understanding of what humanity was. The Dread Maw let out a low rumbling sound, one that was neither a growl nor a threat. It was a sound of recognition, a sound that sent a message across the jungle, across the world, and soon across the stars. Humanity had done the impossible. And now, the galaxy would never see them the same way again.